This is Christian Book Blurb, brought to you by author and songwriter Matt McChlery. Get a behind-the-scenes glimpse into the lives of some of your favourite Christian authors, hear about their books and faith. Also, why not check out my website, mattmcclery.com. Well, hello and welcome to the Christian Book Blurb podcast, where we like to encourage you in your discipleship one book at a time as we meet some amazing Christian authors and learn about their books, their lives, and their faith. I'm your host, Matt McChlery. Thank you so much for the pleasure of your company today. It's fantastic that you clicked play on this podcast and that you've joined us for this important discussion. Well, you know, Christmas is almost here. It's just around the corner. I hope you are getting yourselves ready for that amazing celebration. We might even be chatting to our guest a little bit about Christmas a bit later on. But the book he's written isn't particularly about Christmas, although I do think it deals with a theme that is really important, and it might be something that a lot of us struggle with at this time of year. So my guest today is an award-winning author. He's written more than 80 books, and some of them have even been turned into movies, and you might have even watched some of them. We'll chat more about a little bit about that a bit later on in the show, so you've got that to look forward to. Today I'm going to be talking about the topic of forgiveness with the author Chris Fabry. Hi, Chris.
Great to meet you, Matt. Thanks for having me on today.
I'm so excited that you're with us on the show today. It's really great to have you. And don't you love technology? How I'm sitting here in the UK and you're over there in the States, and we can have this conversation and make this podcast. It's wonderful.
Yeah, I love technology. I love to rail against it sometimes, but when this happens, when COVID happened and everybody kind of went home, it was like everybody got a microphone now, and so we can actually hear each other even better and clearer. So there were some upsides to all of the downsides to the pandemic, but yeah, it's great to get to talk with you over the internet.
Yeah, it's wonderful, and you have just released a new novel called Saving Greyson. And one of the main themes that kind of runs throughout the book is that of forgiveness. So if it's all right with you, I just wanted to start there. Chris, why is forgiveness so important?
I think it's something that we all crave, that we all want. The way that I couch this is, how can I live forgiven? Because what I discover in my own life is that I don't often live forgiven. I live in guilt. I live in shame. I live in regret from the past. I got all this stuff hanging over me that I can't let myself off the hook for, let alone the people around me, and let alone then God. So how do you get forgiveness? How do you really live forgiven? And a lot of people will say, if you do something bad in your life, how do you get forgiveness? But how do you forgive yourself? And I turn that around and capture it this way. I'm really not talking about how I forgive myself. I'm talking about how can I receive the forgiveness that is being offered me, which I cannot work for and I cannot earn. How do I live in that and live from the inside out? So that's the way that I couch that whole thing, because if you truly are forgiven, and if you believe that, you're going to live differently. You're going to interact differently with the people you care about, that you come into contact with every day. You're going to forgive more often than if you hadn't received forgiveness. So it's this pool that we swim in that we don't really even know that we're there.
Why do we need it?
Because we have I think an inner desire to be right, to be okay. I'm okay, you're okay. We can redefine it, say it doesn't matter what you do, but we all have this inner sense of, that's wrong. What that kid did to me in the sandbox is wrong. That shouldn't happen. You see world events, you see rulers, you see, in the last few months, we've seen this in the Middle East. It's like, that's not right. And so we have that inner thing of it's not right, but most of the time we think of it out there, the bad stuff that was out there. Then we come into our own hearts and we say, I'm not right myself. I do things that Paul says that in Romans 7, the thing I want to do, I don't do, and the thing I do, I don't want to do. How a wretched man that I am. What this struggle that is going on all the time. So we need it for that, not only the feeling inside, but to assuage that desire we have to be right, to be holy. And we can't get there ourselves. At least I haven't been able to.
Yeah. And let's sort of turn this on its head for a minute. Rather than talking about forgiveness, what about unforgiveness? What happens if we don't forgive? What could happen to us if we hold on to this bitterness, this kind of, you did this to me and I can't forgive you for that, whatever it is. What does that do to us?
It does exactly what you're saying. It's a poison that you drink yourself. It's like you're thinking this, not forgiving this person over here or a group of people, whomever. You think it's doing something to them and it's not doing anything, really. It's doing it to yourself. And so the greatest way to show love to yourself is to embrace forgiveness, not only for you, but also for other people who do things that you have done or haven't. I'm in the middle of writing a different story, another story, and there's a storyline that comes in here of just this gross mistake that a person has made who has received that kind of forgiveness and doesn't know what to do with it. Doesn't know how to live with it. I don't deserve this. And that's what I hear often from people who talk about God. They'll say, I'm too bad for God to forgive. I've done so many bad things in my life, and I don't deserve his forgiveness. I could never receive his forgiveness. And what they're saying, although they don't understand, what they're saying is, I'm special. I am worse than anybody else. So it's it's a reverse form of pride that keeps us away from the love that God has extended to us, that all we need to do is receive it, allow it to change us on the inside so that then we can extend that to other people. That's really the goal. I think for my Christian life, my goal is for God, change me from the micro to the macro, change me in here so that I don't just get mad at people who cut me off in traffic and, whatever it is, the thing that's happening to me today. Help me to be able to extend the same forgiveness that you've given me, the same love you've given me that I don't deserve. Help me to extend that to other people. And only God can do that kind of work on the inside, I think.
Yeah, that's really good. In your book, Saving Greyson, one of the characters called Sam, he says this. He says, talk of forgiveness galled Sam. People spoke of it like candy you tossed in anyone's pillowcase who rang the bell. To Sam, it was like giving $1 million you didn't have to someone who didn't even ask. Why do you think it's so difficult for some people to forgive?
I love hearing my words come back to me because, you write something and it kind of sticks on the page and it makes it through the editing process. And then it comes back to you. This $1 million you don't have to give to somebody who didn't ask you for it. I think it's so difficult to forgive because, we'll go right back to it because you haven't received it. I don't think that you can give what you've never received and never experienced. A person who has never experienced a day at the beach, like C.S. Lewis talked about, and has always played in the mud at home and hasn't experienced the breadth of the ocean and the sand and that feeling of how immense that is and only has been in the mud puddle, you cannot live from that bigger pool, that joy, that unspeakable kindness of God to give us, a vacation, a holiday at the beach, because we're so mired in the mud puddle. So it takes a work of God, I think, to open our eyes to do that. And that's the hard work, and that's where I lean on the Spirit of God to do that in my life and in others.
And I guess the beautiful thing of that illustration is that we all can experience this forgiveness. We don't have to wait for a family member to forgive us before we can forgive, because God has offered us this ultimate forgiveness through his Son Jesus Christ, and that's offered to everybody, wherever you are in the world. So we all have access to the ocean, as you used in your image. So we can experience forgiveness, and then, as you say, that can then enable us to then forgive others. That's really
Can I just say something too about, Matt, Sam's observation, and that is, it's just kind of candy that's tossed around. When I talk about forgiveness and living forgiven, I don't mean that it's easy. I don't mean that you just, forgiveness is just, I forgive you and I forgive you and I forgive everybody else, I forgive everybody in the world, and it's just, I'm fine. If you've gone through a betrayal, if someone has harmed you physically, if someone has taken the life of someone you love, it is
deep, difficult stuff.
Yeah. And I don't want to be glib about it, like Sam, and as he looks at the church, that's what he hears. I have known people. There was a famous pastor who I spoke with back in the 1980s, and his mother had been hit by a drunk driver and was killed. And this fellow, he had real struggles with the forgiveness thing. And he decided, this is not something that I feel. This is a choice that I make. And part of the choice that he made to forgive was going and seeing the fellow, going and walking into that prison, sitting across from him and saying, I forgive you. I had another example of another person whose husband was killed by a drunk driver. And after the trial, the woman who was responsible for her husband's death reached out to her and said, would you forgive me? Would you consider forgiving me? And she said, I'm a Christian. I know I'm supposed to do this, but I don't feel like it. I've got a struggle here. I've got a hurdle. And I think that the hurdle is God allowing us to work out our faith, work out our salvation. Not that you work for your salvation, but you're working out, what is it that I really believe here? What is it that God has given me? If I can't extend that to somebody else, as hard as this is, what does that say about me and what I believe about him? And so as you get over that hurdle, and it's a process and it can take a long time, for some people, it's, smaller things can be easier to do than others, but just because it takes a long time doesn't mean that you haven't forgiven. Just because you feel, you wake up in the morning and you think of that person and what they did, and you think, oh, now I remember that. That doesn't mean you don't forgive them. It just it means you're still in the process of forgiving them, because you don't forget, except for Greyson. Greyson is forgetting a lot because of his diagnosis. But we don't forget. Forgiveness is not just forgetting everything. It's putting what you remember under the grace and mercy that God has given you.
Yeah, that's really good. And that's one of the things that comes through in the book, is this whole concept, not even concept, but kind of, you see the characters wrestling with their forgiveness, and they're doing something about it, but it's definitely a choice, and in lots of different ways it's really difficult for everyone involved, really. Even Greyson, who's forgetting things, he's finding it really tough as well. But along with this forgiveness, in the book you also get a sense of reconciliation in the story, accompanied by practical actions. do you think forgiveness needs to include some sort of practical or physical action, or is it just enough to, I don't know, forgive them in your heart?
I think it's a both and. I think there are some people, let's say you have someone who has hurt you, wounded you, and they passed away. You can't do something physical for them. You might visit their grave, and put flowers there or something like that, but you can't mend that relationship. And that's the other thing about that's the problem with forgiveness, is that we think forgiveness and reconciliation are the same thing. That if I forgive, first of all, the other person has to say they're sorry and and they have to say it right, they have to be really penitent, really mean it. And once they say they're sorry, then I make the choice, and then we come together and sing Kumbaya and eat cotton candy, and it's all good. And I don't know about you, but that ain't the way it's worked in my life.
Yeah.
There is this sense of, if I've done something to somebody else, there's this sense of penitence, there's a sense of, I need to express what's here. But if I'm on the receiving end of the bad thing that's done, I feel like the hard work goes on in here and it works itself out. Much like the same thing of, if I give my heart to Christ, come into my heart and live in my heart, Jesus, and forgive me of my sin and be Lord of my life, I can keep that in here. It has to work itself out in the way I treat others, in the opportunities that I have to, somebody asked me, why are you so different? What's the deal with you? If I skirt Christ's work in my life, if I put him on the back burner on an airplane and somebody says, what do you do? I write books. What kind of books do you write? I write fiction. And I don't say a Christian fiction or the themes of forgiveness and that kind of thing. And sometimes you have to gauge, where the person is. But, I can kind of deny my faith. It works itself out in these ways, and sometimes really creative ways. I've heard really creative ways about how people have forgiven, or how a person who has wounded someone else, how that person has simply opened the door to the relationship, knowing I could get hurt again, but believing enough in them that they're going to move back toward that person without having ever said anything, without, really dealing with the thing, and just kind of opening the door, moving toward them. That's an element of forgiveness in a heart as well, that, down the road you might have longer conversations about what happened.
That's really helpful. We've already kind of hinted at Greyson's diagnosis earlier on, and obviously this is kind of what the whole book is about, but the main character suffers with Alzheimer's, and I think you do a great job of giving the sense of confusion and loss and frustration that someone living with the disease might experience. And Christmas time, when this podcast episode's going out, there might be family members who are possibly getting together with people with Alzheimer's who they might not have seen in a while, or it's something that they deal with every day. So because you wrote it so well, the first question I wanted to ask is, have you had experience of someone who has suffered from this before?
Yeah, in my family, extended family, I've experienced this. I've experienced it a lot with the radio program that I do, and the folks that come on, and the callers who call, who are sitting right in the middle of this. I'm driving my mother for her hair appointment, and she doesn't remember what's going on. But I had a friend, we lived in Colorado for a number of years, and this is like the best friend that you could ever have, because he had every tool in the world that his dad and his granddad had handed down to him, and I didn't have any. And he knew how to use them too, which I didn't know.
Yeah, that helps.
Yes. And he hunted, he fished, he took me and my sons with him. We'd go to these mountain lakes and streams and fish, and it was just so much fun. Well, we moved to Arizona, a few hundred miles away, And he and his wife came and lived here after all of his kids kind of flew the nest. And one day we were sitting around. He was actually selling his car, and we were going to buy this really nice car for my daughter. And he said, this Alzheimer's thing that they say I have means that. And I looked up at his wife, and her eyes locked at me on mine, and she said, he doesn't talk about this with anybody. He doesn't tell anybody about what's going on. So it was the early stages that we have gone through with him, observing him, and then eventually he and his wife moved to another state, and they're caretaking for her mom. But the journey that I've gone through with him, with phone calls and things that, he doesn't remember anymore, but he still remembers my name, Christopher. He'll say, Christopher, Mr. Jim, I'll say. And the things that the process that he is, the hard process that he's going through, caused me to think, what would it be like for someone who's going through this? I've seen things that happen to the other members of the family, but what would it be like for him to tell from his point of view what he's feeling, what he's thinking? So the device that the novel is based around is I've got a character that I can't depend on to be able to tell me what reality is. He knows what the truth is. He knows what he remembers and what he thinks of everything that's going on. But he doesn't know the real truth about it because of his condition. So I write the story mostly from his point of view. And then you get to see the others who are around him, the family members, the friends, and the people who don't like him very much back in the old town where he's gone to solve this mystery, of his life. I just found it really engaging to jump into his life and try to write the story from that center.
I really enjoyed reading it. It was a great book. And it's called Saving Greyson. Again, if you're listening to this podcast, do go and check out Chris Fabry's new novel, Saving Greyson. It's really good. Thank you for sharing how Alzheimer's has affected you personally. Can you give any advice to anyone listening who might be going through, dealing with, or living through having a family member who has Alzheimer's? So how can we love people well who have Alzheimer's?
I can't give advice. It would seem wrong of me because I'm not living it. But I can tell you what others have said to me. Family members, doctors, professionals who deal with this. And I think the number one thing that I picked up from them was, don't do this alone, because you will isolate yourself. You'll want to isolate yourself because you don't want the other people in the family to experience what you're experiencing. And if you stay isolated like that, it will just eat your lunch. And I have a friend who is a widow, and she said, you need your board of directors, you need your counselors around the table, and choose them well, because you've got to have them walk through some really deep waters with you and be there when you just need to scream, or cry or be prostrate straight on the floor. So get some people around you that you can trust, that care for you, that you can lean on, and don't let that go. Let that be one of the first things you do, because you're going to need them. It's going to be hard enough going through it with them around you. And the other thing that kept coming up was the expectation of, what's going to happen. You're living with this person kind of moving away from you. You're on the dock and they're in the boat right next to you, but they're just kind of slowly moving away. The long goodbye, it's called. And I think what I've heard is the expectations that you have of this person getting frustrated when they don't remember, or this is the fifth time that you've said this to them in the last 5 minutes. They ask the same question over and over and over again. to be able to suspend the judgment of that and the frustration that is in there, to be able to love well, to be able to not scold, but simply go along with them. And really, that's one of the things that the book is about. They kind of let Greyson pave the way for them. They kind of let him lead them instead of them trying to corral him. And, that works well sometimes, and sometimes it doesn't, because he's just this force of nature, But those are the two things that come to mind.
That's really great. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. We'll be back chatting a bit more with Chris Fabry right after these, so stay tuned. Hi, I'm author Matt McChlery. My new book, The Prison Letters, a 40-day devotional for Lent, will take you on a thematic journey through the books of Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and Philemon. Packed full of personal anecdotes and wisdom, the message Paul conveyed to his readers during his imprisonment is brought to life. The Prison Letters devotional is available now from my website, mattmcclery.com, and wherever good books are sold. Get your copy today. If you enjoy listening to this podcast, you can help keep it on the web. All you've got to do is buy me a coffee. Head over to buymeacoffee.com/mattmcclery to make a donation. There is a link in this episode's show notes. So go on, buy me a coffee today and help this podcast to keep supporting Christian books and authors. Hello, welcome back to the Christian Book Blurb podcast. I have been chatting with the author Chris Fabry about his new novel called Saving Greyson just before the interval. But Chris, what we like to do in this part of the show is get to know the author a little bit better. We've got to know your characters and things through your books. But who is Chris Fabry? Do you write full-time? Is that your full-time job? Or, do you do other things as well?
I have a little company that I started, and years and years ago, I named it Just Right Productions Incorporated, because that's what I wanted to do, was just right. But when I was a teenager, I got a job at a radio station, a local radio station in the little town where I lived in West Virginia. So I grew up in West Virginia. And radio has followed me all through the years. And I do it because, some people say because you're good at it. So some people say I'm trying to get it. I'm trying to get it right every time I go on the air. But I just love talking with people. I love talking with guests. I love being talked to as well, Matt. Thank you. But it's something that has hung on with me. And so every day, Monday through Friday, I do a 1-hour talk show on Moody Radio from Moody Bible Institute in Chicago. It's called Chris Fabry Live. And my wife and I were married in 1982, and we're still together after 40 years. December 18th is our 41st anniversary. We have 9 children. And yet, if anybody asking, yes, we do know how it works, because that's always the question you get. And they are and the next question is how old? 38 to 22 now. And we still have 3 with us who haven't flown yet. And that keeps us running and jumping and doing all the things. My wife always wanted to have a farm. Now, I grew up on a farm. She grew up, her dad sold insurance, and so they moved all around the States. But she has always wanted chickens and goats. And so we have 3 goats, 10 chickens, and a covey of quail, because she eats the quail eggs that come from that in our backyard, in the fenced backyard with the snake fence around it too. We had to get the rattlesnake fence because they were getting through.
I was going to say, what type of snakes do you get? Rattlesnakes. Wonderful.
Rattlesnakes.
Great.
Yeah, diamondbacks, they're just gorgeous animals, but, I like to look at them on TV, not in my backyard.
From a distance, yeah. Do you have time for fun and hobbies and that sort of thing? What do you like to do on a down
Absolutely
day?
not. From the time I wake up until the time I go to bed, that's been one of my things that's held me back, I think, Matt, is that I have this very strong work ethic that my father was a part-time farmer, and he worked at a chemical plant. So he was just working all the time. And that's what I saw modeled in front of me. And so I've gotten a lot of the fun that I have is the work that I do, both radio and voice work, and I do audiobooks and that kind of thing. And then the writing that I do, I have so much fun with that I can always be on. I can always be doing something along those lines. And I love to read, but a lot of times I find myself reading to figure out, well, how did they do that? What's their process and how they plot with this? And so reading for fun is hard for me to get over. I got to kind of put a switch in the head to do that. But that's that, I came from a small town in West Virginia. I moved to Chicago. We moved to Colorado and now Arizona. And there's been an awful lot of life that's gone on in those 40 years. And I could talk more about that, but I won't.
So you talk quite a bit about fly fishing in the book. Is that something you've done before? Or did you have to do a whole load of research to get the descriptions right? Because from a sort of a layman's point of view, reading the book, I think, oh, this guy knows what he's talking about. Is it something you've done, or did you just ask a lot of people a lot of questions?
I know enough to want to do it. I know I've read enough Norman McClean, A River Runs Through It, to see it from a distance and just honor it and see it as the art that it is. My friend Jim that I mentioned just a minute ago, who has Alzheimer's, is a fly fisherman. And I've got a picture of him standing in the river with his hat on with the flies in there. And it's just this glorious human and nature melding thing that I never learned as a kid. We had a couple of ponds near our farm, and they were like cow ponds, but there was some bass and bluegill in there, and we'd go out and get the worms and put the bobber in, and catch some fish that way. But I never understood the motion. I could never get the coordination of it. I had an uncle who came, and he took this contraption up there. It's like, what in the world are you doing, Uncle Will? And he said, this is fly fishing. And he had the same thing, he had the hat and the vest and everything. And he would be putting that lure, that little fly, right on top of the water, letting it sit there for just a second, then pulling it off again and back at the same spot, so that it would mimic what an actual fly does. And then what I love about fly fishermen is so many times they'll catch a fish, they'll look at it, they'll just see how gorgeous it looks, take the hook out, and then let it go, which is, again, this symmetry of human and creation and the beauty of it. But, all of that's research. I haven't been able to figure that out yet.
Well, you write it really well, so thank you. Have you got anything coming up? Can we get a sneaky peek into sort of a forthcoming project? Because that's always quite exciting.
Well, I have been working the last few years with some fellows named Kendrick, and they have made some films, War Room, Overcomer, Life Mark, and I took their script and their film and put it into book form for them, with them. Alex Kendrick has the ideas, Alex and Steven mainly, have these ideas, they get them into film, and then I work with Alex about the new idea and what's there. And what I like to say is, people ask, is that hard to have somebody else come up with the idea and you kind of run with it? And I say, no, it's actually easier to do that because they've made all the hard decisions. They've made all the plot lines and what happens and what explodes or if it does or not and the relational aspect of it. They've already made those decisions. So they put the fence line up. What I get to do is get in the pasture and just play around and ask questions. Well, why does Miss Clara live in that house? She's all alone and she's on the second floor. She's going to fall and break a hip. What's going on with that? And so I ask these questions about the characters and the situations and try to flesh out, when you watch a movie, what is she thinking in this scene? I get to come up with that with the Kendrick's blessings. And so I am working on a new film that comes out in 2024. It'll be out in August of 2024 here in the States. I assume in your area at some point around there. that is just this, it's the same redemptive story, but in a little different way than they've told before. So that's all I can tell you. Can't tell you more than that.
You can't tell me the title.
I'm going to hold back on that because I just looked this morning and they still haven't revealed what the title is yet.
Fine.
But
all right. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, anyway, well, that's exciting. Anyway, we'll have to keep our sort of eyes open for a Kendrick film coming out later on in 2024. Well, thank you for that. That's really exciting. Just before we go, though, where can people find out about you or connect with you or buy your books? Have you got websites or any of that kind of stuff?
I do. It's pretty easy. If you can spell my last name, Fabry, Fabry, chrisfabry.com. You can see links in there. You can see the books that I have written. This is Saving Greyson, I think, is my 84th published book. So I've written a lot of children's books, back in the day with Jerry Jenkins, Tim LaHaye, the Left Behind series, and others. But this was what I really wanted to do, write novels for adults because that's what I love to read. So if you go to chrisfabry.com, or you can find me on Facebook or the radio program Chris Fabry Live, look me up. I think you'll find me.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you, Chris. It's really been a pleasure to have you on the show today. And thank you for chatting with me. And as it's December, have a very Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you. And may that the real reason for the season penetrate your heart and mine this year and the rest of the year.
Thank you, Chris. And thank you as well for listening to this episode of the Christian Book Blurb podcast. Don't forget, this podcast comes out twice a month, on the 1st and on the 15th. So we will have a really exciting episode coming out for you in the new year as well. So do keep a lookout for that. New Year's Day, isn't that something to look forward to? And New Year's Day is going to be our 50th episode. So something really special planned for that. So do join us for that one. But thank you so much for joining us. Have a wonderful Christmas yourselves. And I can't wait to have you join us again for another episode of the Christian Book Blurb, where I'll be talking to another Christian author about their books, their life, and their faith. Thanks for joining us. Goodbye. Thanks for listening to Christian Book Blurb with your host, Matt McChlery. Do give it a like, give it a share, and let your friends know all about it. We do hope to see you again soon on another Christian Book Blurb.